Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. Well, so much of today's forecast is going to depend on the position and strength of two separate ridges. Beginning in the west, we've had this ridge here over the Intermountain West that's been around for much of the last 10 days or so. And as we can see, currently it's pulling quite a bit of moisture out of the Pacific into parts of California where there are some scattered showers and storms early this morning. Running around its periphery over the weekend, we did see some stronger storms that did move through parts of the northern plains, but also curled back around the south side of this, bringing some heavy rain into parts of New Mexico and Arizona. But under that ridge, we have extremely poor air quality as it has really trapped the smoke in the west. We'll take a closer look at that here in just a few moments. The second ridge I want to talk about is the one that's right over here just off the southeast coast. Directly to its south and west a little bit here is Tropical Storm Laura right in through this area, and it will be moving into the Gulf of Mexico here, becoming a relatively strong tropical system, potentially up to Category 2, maybe even Category 3 strength hurricane before coming in over here toward Louisiana. But out ahead of that, we have Marco, and you can't really see Marco, but I'll put an X over where the circulation for Marco is down at the surface, and it is forecast to continue to produce some heavy rainfall along the Florida Panhandle and then move here over toward the Texas-Louisiana border. So we have two separate tropical systems to be discussing today. The short waves in this flow that are going to be impactful are going to be this one here and one here, and there's actually one that's just off the image. It's over here almost in parts of Russia. And why I say these are going to be impactful, because as this ridge breaks down that's over the western United States, it'll be these short waves swinging through the Canadian prairies, then eventually into the northern United States. They're going to finally move out a lot of the heat we're going to be building into the temperature profile here across the lower 48 for the next 4 to 5 days. But the only place it's going to be staying on the cooler side of things is going to be right down here in the southeast coast, where a lot of cloud cover is going to keep things relatively cool. So from there, let's take a look at the early morning radar. We can still see the stronger storms moving out of North Dakota into parts of eastern South Dakota, but into Minnesota. Some of the storms in this same region over the weekend produced some hail. These storms will continue to move over toward eastern sides of Minnesota and then reinvigorate later today in Wisconsin, and then over the weekend be a part of a storm system that increases the severe weather threat farther to the east. Scattered storms in Nebraska, South Dakota, also in Indiana and West Virginia. And if you take a look down here, this is the kind of the sheared apart northeastern view of Marco, and you can see some very heavy rainfall moving through parts of Alabama, Georgia, and the Florida Panhandle. Meanwhile, out west, we can see quite a bit of moisture that's coming into California here, producing some very heavy rainfall and quite a bit of lightning in our early morning storms that had moved across parts of California. But the moisture that is moving into those storms is actually from the remnants of Hurricane Genevieve, and you can see on this precipitable water map how high the moisture content is compared to normal here in the western part of the United States, pulling onto the western side of that ridge. So we're supplying quite a bit of moisture to the lower atmosphere, which is triggering some of these showers and storms. Now, the rain coming through is going to be desperately needed to help clear out the air, but unfortunately we do have quite a bit of lightning in some of those storms early this morning. Now, when I say quite a bit of lightning, it's relative, right? But we typically don't have thunderstorms in this part of California this time of year, so we're concerned about any time we see lightning in the western United States. So early this morning, we were watching those storms moving through that part of California, but also the complex that was still here and coming out of parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, and into Minnesota. Meanwhile, take a look at our two tropical systems, Marco here and also Laura here. A lot of lightning in both of these. In fact, yesterday we got a pretty amazing view here from the NOAA Hurricane Hunter. This came from Nick Underwood as they were flying into Tropical Storm Laura. You can actually see quite a bit of lightning off in the distance. Now, we often don't think of tropical systems as making a lot of lightning, because to make lightning, you need to have a lot of ice in a storm. So in other words, you need to have a very thick layer from bottom to top in these thunderstorms that must contain a lot of different types of ice too, not just hail, but hail, grapple, needles, all sorts of different species of ice, as we call it. That is what gives you charge separation. So that tells us as Laura was interacting here with the mountains over parts of Cuba, and then earlier this weekend over the island of Hispaniola, we were able to generate a lot more cooler upper level temperatures, hence the lightning that we see in this video from Nick. From there, though, I would like to show you yesterday's GOES 16 view here, our true color imagery going over to infrared here as that line sweeps across the image. We can see the major storm systems we just finished talking about, but what I'd like to address in this particular animation, let me pause it right there as the sun was setting. We're going to take a closer look at Marco in just a few moments here, because the center of circulation has kind of decoupled from its main convective cloud bands here. We'll talk about that in a second. But notice how extensive the smoke is across the western part of the United States, encroaching here on parts of the plains and in the Midwest. We can see that by looking here at an animation forecasting vertically integrated smoke throughout the day today and into tomorrow. We're going to be spreading that smoke from those western wildfires through the Great Lakes states over into parts of the Northeast here. So this is extensive now. The smoke has traversed the United States from the fires we've seen in California and parts of Colorado and getting into parts of the Pacific Northwest. So pretty amazing here to see this smoke moving so far across the country. All right, over the weekend, where do we see the precipitation? Well, tucked into our ridge out west, quite a bit of scattered thunderstorm activity in the Four Corner states, and you can see the precipitation in California. We also did have a shortwave that moved into parts of coastal Oregon and Washington. The storms that moved through this area of the weekend had some hail coming out of the storms in parts of Minnesota and North Dakota. You can also see in the high plains, storms continue to kind of cascade down the eastern side of that ridge. As we had been anticipating, a lot of hit or miss thunderstorm activity kind of bounded here by the Ohio River and the Mississippi River toward the south and east. But as Marco has made its way toward the Florida Peninsula here, or excuse me, the Florida Panhandle here, we've seen some locally very, very heavy rainfall. Now let's dig into these tropical systems a little bit here. This satellite animation shows both of them, and I want you to focus first on the storms that are moving here on the northern side. This would be Marco here. Now what we need to notice here is that the main convection, that's the deep dark colors telling us where the biggest thunderstorms are, seem to be decoupled from the center of circulation, which is farther to the south. Secondly, there is quite a bit of wind shear on this system, which has kind of torn it apart and prevented it from becoming stronger than it is. And that's simply because of how warm the water is underneath this. We thought it could be quite powerful, but you can see the low-level clouds moving in a different direction from the upper-level clouds. So we're going to take a closer look at where that is in a few moments, but you might also notice that Laura, that eventually came over the island of Hispaniola and is now just south of Cuba, looks a bit disorganized, but that would be anticipated after interacting with the mountains. But we're going to watch Laura continue to stay much farther to the south than originally anticipated before getting into the Gulf of Mexico. So what do we have? This is the latest. This is the 4 a.m. update here, Central Time, for what we're expecting out of Marco. Continuing to be tropical storm in strength with 60-mile-an-hour max sustained winds here, and it's going to just move along the Louisiana border over towards Texas, and as it does so, produce some locally heavier rainfall amounts. But once again, the problem is out ahead of it. There's quite a bit of dry air here, and as you can see, the main circulation is decoupled from the biggest storms, which are to its north, and that's where we're going to be seeing, or north and east, which is where we're going to be seeing most of the heaviest precipitation. So through early this morning, all of the moisture, as you can see here, is going to be kind of decoupled from the main circulation, which is going to prevent this particular system from strengthening rapidly before it hits land later on this morning. So how much rainfall are we anticipating? Well, right there along the coast, we could see that through let's see here, 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning, we could possibly pick up right here along the coast anywhere between 1.5 and upwards of 4 inches of rainfall. But this would be where Laura is coming through here, much farther to the south, and it's going to be hitting possibly on the Texas-Louisiana border later on this week. So just a side note, these two systems are not combining. They can't combine. Hopefully that was explained pretty well over the weekend. And as they move together into the Gulf, they're going to act as two entirely separate systems. So let's switch over and look through Wednesday morning at our maximum wind gusts. You can see that from Marco, we're only going to be getting wind gusts that are going to be approaching here, possibly, in the mid-30s to possibly get up to about 60 miles an hour right there along the coast. But this right in through here would be Laura coming through later on this week. So let's take a look at what the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center has got for Tropical Storm Laura, which is right now at 65 miles an hour. Once clearing the the island of Cuba getting out into the open Gulf, it is expected to intensify. The National Hurricane Center, which is where I'm going to rely on the forecast for the strength of this, right now has this as potentially a strong Category 2 strength storm, maybe getting wind speeds up over above 115 miles an hour, which could put it at a Category 3 by the time it makes landfall. You can see the National Hurricane Center is a pretty, wide cone here, which we would expect this many days out on where it could potentially hit. And we still have to watch for some movement in this cone because it has certainly moved quite a bit to the west. If you remember from last Friday in our regional outlooks, we thought that the National Hurricane Center had this centered pretty well here, coming into someplace between Florida Peninsula and Alabama, but has since shifted considerably to the west. When we look at the European model guidance, I'll tell you this. We'll follow one set of tracks right in through here and a second set that's further to the west. The GFS is following the more eastward trajectory here of the European model. But the point is as it comes on land, it will curl right into parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley, heading over to the Ohio and Tennessee Valley here, potentially producing some very heavy rainfall in through this corridor as well. Taking a look at the timing of this system, this again from the National Hurricane Center, it appears that sometime late Tuesday night to Wednesday morning is when we will have landfall. And again, I'm expecting this to be a relatively powerful tropical system at that point, possibly a strong Category 2. But this is the extent of the tropical storm force winds, so those being greater than 39 miles an hour. So this is going to possibly produce some pretty extensive wind damage. Now, if we take a look at those winds as forecast by the GFS operational on the left and the European operational on the right, we do see both models honing in on a very similar area that could be experiencing tropical storm force to hurricane force winds here. Now, one note to make, we do know of the bias of the European model extending these these severe winds from the tropical system too far inland. It typically does that. So by the time we get out to Thursday evening, the European bringing in these 70, 80, 90 mile an hour gusts into parts of Arkansas are probably exaggerated a bit much, but seeing 40 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts in there, as the GFS is suggesting, is certainly in the possibility. And then keeping these stronger winds, I'm talking 30 to 40 mile an hour winds that come up into parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, and extending on either side, a couple, maybe 100 miles on either side, is something we're going to have to watch for as we work our way toward the end of this weekend into the weekend. Now, total precipitation, this is what the GFS has on the left and the European has on the right, and we do see quite a bit of similarities in this. Let's look at all of our weather systems here, though, not just the tropical systems. Starting west, as the ridge still occupies the west, a lot of scattered storms showing up in both the GFS on the left and the European on the right. We're going to continue to watch for severe storms to be coming out of the northern plains into the Great Lakes states and extending into the northeast. I'll show you that in more detail in a few moments. Both models seeing that. It will be wetter once you get north in the Canadian prairies in through here into Ontario, but drier as you go into the southern Canadian prairies. Both models seeing that as well. But the trick will be how far north will the moisture from Laura make it. You can see that the GFS brings across Missouri, Illinois, getting into southern Indiana, quite a bit of precip, whereas the ECMWF keeps it a little bit farther to the south there. And that will be a tricky forecast that we'll just have to wait to see once the system gets inland how far to the north it will make it. So we're going to have to wait later in the week to catch on to that. Maybe an easier way to see this is to look at the next 7 days in terms of difference from normal. So that's what these two maps are showing you. Again, the GFS on the left, the European on the right. And feel free to pause it and take a closer look at your area. But what I want to do is I want to take these two maps and put them into context of how the month of August has gone up to this point. So here again, we're looking at precipitation ranks by climate district, August 1st through the 24th. And we can see places that have been very wet, for example, over there in the mid-Atlantic, getting into parts of the Carolinas and backing into the mid-South. But do notice there is a region in through here that's been quite dry that, as we just saw, may be missing out on the precipitation from the events that are coming up from both the north and the south toward this particular part of the Corn Belt. So just notice this area and how dry it's been. It's been very dry in parts of western Pennsylvania, and then of course in the Intermountain West underneath that larger ridge. So let's keep this picture here in mind as we work our way forward in this precipitation forecast. Severe weather. Monday is in the upper left, Tuesday is in the top center, and Wednesday is in the right. You can see that as the ridge breaks down and begins to spread that heat to the east along its northern periphery, that is where we're expecting to see our severe weather over the next 3 days. Playing out on the bottom here, this is this morning's high-resolution NAM model. So I've stopped it here about 8 a.m. We can see the remnants of the storms here in parts of Minnesota. Well, watch what happens later on in the day today. They really start to get cooking again here in this evening, moving across parts of central Minnesota and over into Wisconsin. Meanwhile, as I kind of step you back here, widespread showers and storms coming up from Marco as it comes in toward like the New Orleans area as I kind of rock back and forth late this afternoon and this evening. We also see the scattered storms developing in the Intermountain West and running along the periphery here, coming through Idaho, back into Oregon and into Montana. As we let this play out into the overnight hours on Monday night into early Tuesday, we can see where Marco's spreading the heavier rainfall to the north here. And as we work our way into Tuesday midday, we do need to keep an eye on this part of Ohio and Pennsylvania for the potential for some strong storms, as you can see right here. So this could be hitting a very dry pocket of Pennsylvania. And then as we work our way in through Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning, now we don't rely on the NAM for reliable information here about tropical systems, but we can at least see where it's putting that. So from there, why don't we switch over to a multi-model comparison here from the GFS on the left and the European on the right, and just look at over the next week. So this will be this morning. Now we can see both models, pretty good agreement here to get things started. So again, this is early this morning. We have both Marco and Laura in very similar positions. We have the scattered precip that's out ahead of it, and it's even picked up pretty well on the scattered storms that are still moving through parts of the Dakotas into Minnesota. So if we go from there into Monday afternoon and evening, still decent agreement here. You can see the potential for the storms right here along this pressure trough. Same thing here in the European model, and the scattered storms over the southeast pulling into the northeast. As we go from basically Monday evening into Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon and evening. Once again, so we have our large low that's off the coast. This will be where we get the scattered severe weather storms here, producing some severe weather, tucking back here into parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. You can see it in both models here. And a pretty good agreement on the position and strength of Laura. Notice there, it got almost both got them lined up in the same places. Here's our storms moving out of parts of Saskatchewan into Manitoba, and good agreement there as well. So let's go from Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, and evening. So once again, we see that both models are bringing the system somewhere close to the Louisiana, Texas border. The European bringing it a little bit farther to the north more quickly than the GFS is doing at this point, but still the same pressure trough extending out of the Central Plains here toward Lake Superior, shown up in both models. So we can expect to see storms running the periphery of that. See it there? It's showing up in both models. From there, let's get through Wednesday evening and now into Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, and evening. So at that point, we can see the center of Laura right now in Arkansas. Models are definitely in agreement with that. And the storms returning here to the Dakotas. It's also showing up in both models. So impressive agreement through this point. Now where we are here is Thursday night getting into Friday early morning, Friday afternoon, and evening. This is about the point where our models begin to diverge. So 5 days into this, we start to see some separation in what they're picking up on. For example, the European keeping a much stronger low over this part of Ontario and much heavier precipitation out ahead of it as a result. But we can see the heavy rainfall moving through parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, into the Ohio Valley here, with storms stretched to the north of it on the southern side of this low where the frontal boundary will be sitting. So I know we're going in a lot of detail here, but let's work our way now to Saturday morning, afternoon, and evening. So we can see the system now fully off the coast. And on the back side, remember the troughs I was telling you to watch over Alaska? Well, here comes the second one into the parts of the Canadian prairies, the northern Canadian prairies. Now that one is going to be a part of a system that will then blow through this part of Canada, bringing in a pretty powerful front to its south. And models are still okay. They're still, I shouldn't have said they're not that good agreement, because this is actually pretty good for both models. Look at the potential for the strong to severe storms, though, that come through this area with the scattered storms out ahead of it, stretching from parts of the southeast in through the mid-south into southern Illinois. You can see something similar in the European. So let's stop there at a week out and then look at what week 2 is going to hold. Now that's trough right here, is going to be a critical part to what you're going to see next, because by the time we go from day 7 to day 10, both models bringing in a broad trough here, the leading edge of which will have that low pressure center on it. So look at the cooler air that will be coming into that trough, while the warmth goes right back out into the Gulf of Alaska. Going from day 10, where we have good model agreement, to day 15, the European advances the trough much quicker than the GFS. And so this is going to allow heat to build into the west quicker in the European than it will into than the GFS will. But before I talk about that, let's at least take a look. Let's go back there and take a look at the differences in our model forecast for week 2 precipitation. We saw this last week, and now we're seeing it again this week. This area extending up into the Canadian prairies and into Ontario, showing up wet. You can see that the European doing the same thing here. Okay, so we have pretty decent agreement into week 2 on the heaviest rains. Where they differ is when we get down into parts of Texas and along the Gulf Coast. With the European advancing the trough much quicker to the east, it's bringing a broader front farther to the south than what the GFS is doing, which is hanging that trough back and not allowing it to dig far into the southern United States. That's the model differences here. Now, from that point of view, let's take this over to discussion on temperature. This is how the first 3 weeks of August have shaped up. Near record heat for the southwest, and look at how cool things have been compared to normal in parts of the middle United States here, right smack dab in the middle. Where we're going with this is heat. I mean, you can see it right here. We're expecting high temperatures today in the upper 90s, stretching from Montana all the way through the high plains, including the Front Range, possibly some triple-digit heat right here in parts of Nebraska and South Dakota. And that extends. Look at the high heat extending all the way over to the Great Lakes states in the Northeast. This is all cloud cover dominated and precipitation dominated down here in the south, which is why it's cool. Going from there into Tuesday's high temperatures compared to normal. Look at the heat in the central part of the United States. But watch the change Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. There comes the first trough sweeping through, bringing in again the chance for the severe storms, but also the change in temperature. As we go from Friday into Saturday and Sunday, now we have the first trough sweeping through and the second one coming here into the Pacific Northwest. But the only place that maintains the high heat through the whole week is going to be parts of the Southwest getting into this part of Texas. From there, let's stretch this out to the 6 to 10 day forecast. Remember, the GFS is slower in the progression of the trough. So there it is in the GFS. Here it is in the European. And so the European, by the time we get out to days 11 through 15, brings the heat back into the west sooner, advancing the trough farther south and farther east, whereas the GFS lingers this trough here in the Canadian prairies and doesn't move it as quickly to the east. That's the main differences here as we look out longer term. Oh, speaking of longer term, we're going to be talking this week about the position of the MJO and how it's interacting with La Nina. I was a bit off 2 weeks ago talking about the potential for a temporary weakening of this La Nina. It did not happen. We quickly moved the MJO out of the way, which allowed cooler water to continue to stay in this area. So it looks as though as we pull into this late summer and early fall time period, this La Nina is going to strengthen a bit. This is going to be important for hurricanes, where we currently have very warm ocean temperatures, but also critical for what's going to be happening in South America, and that's where we'll finish. You see, with the strengthening trades over the next couple of weeks, there's no reason to say that this La Nina is going to kind of continue to waffle about. It looks as though with those strengthening trades, the Southern Oscillation Index is going to continue to stay positive, and the MJO is going to move. So what does all that mean? That means for South America, where we're thinking about this next growing season beginning, it appears that through the month of September, Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Bahia, Mato Grosso do Sul, even down to Paraná, is going to continue with drier than average conditions. And we have to wait for the monsoonal precipitation to come in here before we're going to start to get aggressive on planting. So what this means is the possibility of an early start to the planting season in this section of South America, the possibility of an early start is not necessarily in the cards at this point. So watch it carefully, keep you up to date, okay? I appreciate your attention. Hope you all have a great week, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.